Welcome back to Whence, a Freemasonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry. I'm your host, Brother Robert Johnson. This is episode 176. Wow. So we finished up last year. It's been a couple weeks since I've been on the podcast. I've got lots of news and I've got announcements and all kinds of great stuff. So I'll just kind of get right into it. Of course, it's the new year. We have new segments coming. Took a poll on Facebook, and it really came out that you guys want to hear, more than anything, esoteric discussions. What came in secondly was Masonic history, and what came in third was Masonic conspiracies. So the idea is we are going to be having, not myself, but other brothers come into the show with segments, and they will be like the Esoteric Minute or the Historical Minute, and they may be longer than a minute, up to 5 minutes probably, and they're going to be really cool. Hopefully we'll have one for this episode also, and that will be an Esoteric Minute by a good friend of mine who I really think he would be a great person to head this up. And later on down the line, the more these segments grow, we are going to introduce them into their own shows. So eventually there will be a Whence esoteric show that might be up to 30 minutes or so. Same with a historical show or a conspiracy show. I'll be producing them and mastering them and all that. I won't be the hosts of those shows. We're going to try to grow the network. We're going to try to grow what we call WCY Media, which is basically Masonic audio that's listener funded, and hopefully we can bring Masonic education to a new level. So that's all in the works. Segments again are going to be hosted by new people, some you know, some you may not, and eventually we're going to launch them as their own shows. Now there will be a couple sides to what we call WCY Media. WCY Media is going to be again a primary host for Masonic podcasts. However, there may be brothers who have a podcast that is not necessarily Masonic, but is an entertaining podcast. Those types of podcasts we may also be producing. So one of the podcasts that I'm really excited about kind of fell off for a little while because this brother just didn't have the time to completely keep up with the production of it. So starting soon, we are going to reintroduce the Far From Centered podcast with Brother Robert P. Lewis under the WCY Media flag. So he'll be doing his episodes. I'll take care of all of the upkeep and the audio production, and I'll take care of that for him, and he's going to be right there under the WCY Media flag, so we're really excited about that. We're going to be uploading his episodes starting from episode number 1, so we have a ton of backlog already ready to go, so those are going to start coming out, and he will indeed be doing new episodes every now and then, and we'll start uploading those as well. So I'm really excited about that. You heard it here. We're going to start that very soon, so you can look for the Far From Centered podcast with Robert P. Lewis. It's coming back. So also under the WCY Media, of course, is the Masonic Radio Theater. We just did our Christmas show that came out very nice. Brother Bill Hosler did a great job editing that. All I did was kind of put the finishing touches on it, and he did a really nice job with that, and I thought it was great. It was nostalgic. It was a good show. So a giant thanks again to Brother Bill Hosler for producing that last episode. Some people have asked, is the Masonic Roundtable part of WCY Media? It is not. The Masonic Roundtable is a joint effort and is basically the brainchild of Brother John Ruark and Jason Richards. Those guys, that is just an amazing thing that they started. And I'm just lucky enough to be a part of that one. However, you will find links all the time to TMR on any of our websites. And so speaking of TMR, I really hope you guys have all been keeping up with the cool stuff we've been doing there. We had some really neat discussions. We didn't go dark at all for Christmas, so we went live on Tuesday before New Year's and Tuesday before Christmas. It was a lot of fun. In the last week, there was a neat event that happened over the break. We found out that there was a time capsule buried, and it was from 1795, and they opened it up this last week at like 7 o'clock, and it was on Wednesday, and turns out it was from Sam Adams and from Paul Revere, and we had some great discussion about that on the Masonic Roundtable. So if you guys want to hear more about that, please check out episode number 48 of the Masonic Roundtable to hear about it. I hope you all just had a wonderful holiday. I know this year is going to be amazing with the launch of probably 3 new shows to add to WCY Media, as well as Far From Centered, the WCY Media brand, of course, of Masonic education through listener-supported podcasts, but also in new endeavors. In fact, we are looking at getting Whence Media or WCY Media as a publishing house as well at some point. Very far down the road. Right now, it's just a little idea that we're kind of toying with. So I'll keep you guys all in touch on that stuff as well. I did want to quickly share with you that I will be at Bicknell Lodge in Broadhead, Wisconsin, presenting on the 27th of January, just in a couple weeks here, and it's going to be on a Tuesday evening. They will gavel at 7 o'clock. That's when the meeting starts, so if you're in that area, I would love to sit in lodge with you. Also, the second annual Pleiades Masonic Education Symposium is coming up in Westchester, Illinois. I'll be speaking and presenting as well as a bunch of other amazing Masonic scholars, including one of my mentors, Brother Toddy Creason. Details, you can find those at wcypodcast.com and click on the presentation schedule, and you will see all of the details regarding that. While all that is good news, we here at WCY and at countless other Masonic groups, lodges, businesses received some pretty tragic news over this last couple weeks. Brother Ed Barclay of the Barclay Watch Company passed away on New Year's Eve. I was totally shocked. I only knew Brother Ed from our social media interactions and through his amazing timepieces. Within 5 hours, his Facebook wall was just filled with amazing memorial messages. He was a great man, artist, and brother. As we always do, in honor of our departed brother, Brother Ed Barclay, and any other brothers that we've lost this last year, I would like you guys to all join me in a moment of silence for our departed brothers. All right, Godspeed to our departed brothers, and now we're going to move on to the paper of the week. So we've read papers in the past about the future of Masonry, and it was interesting to say the least. This one is about the past, and we'll get into that right now. Masonry Past, Masonic Spring Workshop 1990, Part 1, by Brother Jack Collet. In Shakespeare's play As You Like It, there is a well-known speech by Jacques wherein he tries to explain to his distressed father, the Duke, the ways of the world. He says, quote, "All of the world is a stage, and all of the men, women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man, in his time, plays many parts, his acts being 7 ages. Jacques goes on to outline those 7 stages, starting with the infant and ending with old age. Last scene of all, that ends this strange, eventful history, is second childness and mere oblivion. Sans teeth, sans eyes, sans taste, sans everything. Human life does not progress through these various stages as smoothly as Shakespeare would have us think. People get stuck at certain stage and never progress. There are individuals that never get out of their adolescence no matter how old they are. Some don't even get out of the whining schoolboy age. Organizations are very much like the human being. They start with a newness and excess of energy and normally should progress to maturity and wise old age. So often organizations get stuck at one point of development and go no further. The Masonic Order does not differ from human beings or from other organizations in this regard. There is always the possibility of getting stranded at one stage of development and remaining there while the rest of society forges ahead to new concepts and exciting challenges. Masonry came into Alberta when on January 13th, 1882, the Grand Lodge of Manitoba granted a dispensation for Saskatchewan Lodge No. 17, GRM, to be established. This lodge was instituted on February 13th of the same year and consecrated on April 21st, 1882, with 13 members. Despite the Shakespearean model of development, Saskatchewan Lodge did not develop beyond infancy, and the charter was surrendered on February 13, 1889. Another start was made 2 years later when the Grand Lodge of Manitoba issued a dispensation to erect Bow River Lodge No. 28, GRM, on January 1, 1884. In its infancy in Alberta, the Masonic Order grew very well. There were no great problems. With the influx of settlers, more lodges were organized. Many of them met monthly at the time of the full moon so that the members could have some light for their treks to the meetings and for their way home if their meetings did not last until the first light of dawn. It was a time when the lodge met quietly and when fellowship was most essential to these pioneering folk who had little enough contact with other people. Time moved on. and the District of Alberta attracted more and more settlers. The Northwest Mounted Police brought law and order into the western lands. The Canadian Pacific Railway bound the country together with its bands of steel. By the summer of 1905, there were 18 Masonic lodges operating in the District of Alberta. The result was the Grand Lodge of Alberta, which was established on October 12, 1905, just about 1 month after the province of Alberta had come into existence. Masonry in Alberta followed the Shakespearean model. Moved into its adolescent period, it was one of great growth and of deep interest in the development of the Grand Lodge constitution and consecration of various lodges. Even the First World War, 1914 to 1918, did not stop the expansion of the Masonic order in Alberta. Settlers poured into the northern areas and into many other parts of the province. At the conclusion of the Great War, the Grand Lodge of Alberta had 110 lodges under its jurisdiction. Masonry in Alberta continued to flourish in spite of the Great Depression of the 30s and World War II, which ended in Europe on May 7, 1945, and in the Far East on August 29, 1945. Optimism was in the Alberta air because of the economic prosperity, especially when the oil boom hit Alberta. Despite the fact that there was a spirit of optimism in the province, there were indications that instead of following Shakespeare and going immediately from adolescence into maturity, the Masonic order was in for a period of non-development. One Grand Master asserted that the Masonic Lodge, quote, should be a factor in the life of the community. Another Grand Master asserted that it was time for Freemasonry to set its house in order, and he said this could not be done by, quote, the weary occupation of how we can beat up a new enthusiasm, but that it could be done by clarifying the goals for which the order stood. Another Grand Master felt that Masonry should move out of its tendency to shield itself from the community life and proposed that the Grand Lodge organize a boys' farm to reclaim delinquent adolescents. Loss in membership caused some concern. The Grand Lodge communication in 1966 heard of a decrease of 170, and the next year it was 180. At the same time, there were cries that the quality of applicants was decreasing. When I was a newly ordained minister, I was sent in 1938 to the small town of St. Paul in northeastern Alberta. It was a largely Roman Catholic French-speaking area. Most of the Protestants in town were transient bank employees, CNR employees, RCMP, and so forth. A number of them were Masons. Although most of them were faithful church members, to this day I do not know where the Masonic Hall was located. I visited St. Albans Lodge number 145 when I was Grand Master, and no one could understand why I had not applied for membership while I was there. St. Albans did not survive. It was constituted on July 29, 1926, and on July 7, 1973, it amalgamated with St. George Lodge number 169 of Elk Point. My next appointment was at Tabor. The church board there was made up of almost completely Masons. The secretary was Anglican. Each summer, he would come over to our house with flowers and vegetables for my wife. At that same time, he would enter into a very pleasant conversation with me. Never once did the subject of Masonry come up. When I visited there, when I was Grand Master, they told me they could never understand why I did not apply for membership. Doric Lodge constituted on July 10, 1908. But on May 4th, 1979, Doric Lodge number 31 amalgamated with Lucerne Lodge number 159, and the lodge meetings were moved from Tabor to Vauxhall. Then I moved to Claresholm. Tuesday nights in Claresholm were lodge night, and no other meetings were ever scheduled for Tuesdays. One day, I became exasperated with this inflexible situation, and I said to the clerk of session, what in the world is so important about these lodges that we all have to plan around what they claim is their special night? He calmly asked if I really wanted to know, and I said, you bet I do. You see where that rather rash and hasty statement landed me. In Claresholm, the barber was Bill Mackenzie. He was my coach. As most of you know, I never boast about my ability as a ritualist. In fact, there was one time when I was raising a candidate in the 3rd degree. I wandered off the track, but being accustomed to ad-libbing, I continued on until the candidate was finally raised. After the lodge was closed, a brother very skilled came over to me and said, I want to compliment you on your work. It was done very well. Would you mind telling me what rite you were working in? Bill was an excellent coach. I would go down to the barber shop, and he could immediately, in the middle of a morning, pull down all the blinds and lock the door. Then we would go at it with no book visible at all. The members of the lodge would go by the barbershop and say, well, Bill's at it with Calais again. I wonder if he'll ever make it. We did make it. But It is a source of constant regret that Cairo Lodge today struggles for its very existence. One day, when I was Grand Master, I was in the Grand Lodge office, and the Grand Secretary, the late Ned Rivers, asked me if I would like to make a surprise visit to the Picture Butte that night, and I said yes. So Ned got on the phone. We rounded up 2 carloads from Calgary. He telephoned Del McQueen, a past Grand Master who lived in Vulcan, who arranged for another 2 carloads, and the district deputy of Lethbridge, who arranged for several cars. We arrived in Picture Butte after nightfall and had a supper in a small cafe. To my surprise, Ned was not sure where the lodge room was located. We asked the waitress, and she had never heard of the Masons. She knew about the Lions, the Knights of Columbus, but not the Masons. An RCMP constable was having a cup of coffee. He couldn't help. We went outside and then saw a dim light a block away and decided that was the lodge room. I have a distinct recollection of the junior warden on the telephone trying to persuade his wife to make more sandwiches. He said, "They're coming by the carload from all directions. We've got to do something." The master of the lodge survived the shock and received the party well. The lodge room had never seen such a crowd, and what a great evening it was. The sorry part was that the Masonic Lodge was making no impact on the community as far as being a public presence was concerned. The Masonic Spring Workshop started in my term as Grand Master when we decided to have a study session the Tuesday evening before the Grand Lodge sessions commenced. Those were the days when the brethren came into the city, the night before Grand Lodge opened, and we were at loose ends for something to do in the evening. The idea was prompted first of all by the conviction of many that we needed to talk informally about Masonry, and also by a popular book that had been written by Most Worshipful Brother Dwight L. Smith, the Grand Secretary of the Grand Lodge of Indiana, titled Whither Are We Traveling? And an article, Why All the Confusion in the Temple? These works were attempts to study the widespread malaise that was beginning to affect Freemasonry. Alberta was reporting a decline in membership, an alarming decrease in attendance, and increasing talk about amalgamation or surrendering charters. That first evening at Mount Royal College was overwhelmingly successful. We had such a large attendance that we were pressed to find rooms for the small groups to meet in for discussions. This led to the proposal that Masons throughout Alberta should be given an opportunity to get together to discuss Masonry in an informal and unstructured way, not hampered by the formalities of lodge meetings. We were fortunate to have Mel Dunford in the Grand Lodge office as assistant to the Grand Secretary. He had a background of experience with the United Church Men's Conference that was held in Banff annually. After some discussion, it was decided that we would attempt a Masonic Spring Workshop organized along the lines of the United Church effort. It would be a tragedy if we did not pause here to pay a tribute to Mel Dunford, who bore the brunt of the organization of the workshop and acted as its secretary some 15 years. I can well remember the first workshop. The Banff School of Fine Arts was not organized to handle the large number of Masons who wanted to attend. There were no large residence buildings. When the committee arrived 2 days early to set up the workshop, Mel was handed all the keys and was told to assign rooms. Somehow, he had everything ready when the influx came. I suspect he went without sleep for at least one night. Not only did we have a profitable time in discussions, but we had a memorable social time as well. Jim Woods proved to be an efficient parade marshal, visiting rooms with the aid of the piper to unheard of morning hours. Of course, there were difficulties in the early years, but they were not sufficiently serious to mar the real purpose of the gatherings. The problem that Masonry was facing, if we follow our Shakespearean model, was that Masonry had stalled in its growth and remained in its late adolescent years. The craft was so bent on secrecy and self-examination that it was failing to make a meaningful impact on the community. It was not visible amongst the multitude of organizations in the community. The general public did not know what Masonry was and what it did. There were many amazing stories around about Masonic practices. Even the members of the Masonic order were not all certain of their purpose. Indeed, it was a typical mixed-up adolescent age. The basic problem is one common to all organizations which have a long history. The organization has a purpose and a philosophy with which it starts. It also exists within a society. The organization takes on some of the characteristics of the society in which it lives. Thus, you have a combination of the basic principles of the organization combined with the peculiarities of the society, which makes up the way in which the organization operates. The difficulties come when the human society changes, and in the last 80 years, our society has changed very rapidly. When an organization refuses to move with the changes in society, then that organization ceases to be effective. Freemasonry started with a number of basic principles. It lived in a pre-modern society and took unto itself many characteristics of the society. It became static and wanted to carry with it not only the basis principles, but also a multitude of outworn customs. Because of this, it has found itself in the backwaters of modern life. So the Masonic Order is in difficulty with the church, the younger generation, and society in general. Masonry must look at itself, decide what basic principles are fundamental, and must cast aside those prejudices and practices that are not essential. It was fine 50 years ago for a lodge to meet quietly for the sake of fellowship and not talk about its purposes and objectives. Society accepted that, for the age of communication had not arrived. When the new age did come, Masonry was not prepared and was passed by. The time has come now for the Masonic Order to examine itself and ask two questions. 1. What are these things that are so basic? What are those things that are basic to the order? And 2. What are those elements that are not essential and can be put aside as accretions in order that the order will fit into the world of the 21st century? Tonight, we are looking at the past. In the next couple of days, other speakers will analyze Masonry as it is today and as it must be tomorrow. Let us look at the past. What elements do we bring from the past that must be maintained today and tomorrow? 1. When we take away all of the trappings with which Masonry has surrounded itself during its long history, we find that the fraternity exists for one purpose, and that is to preserve, to transmit to other posterity the worthwhile parts of civilization that our forefathers passed on to us. And 2. Masonry is an organization of human effort to preserve and promote civilization, but it does not do this in terms of caste or creed or within political, terrestrial, or religious limits. In other words, it is universal. Because of this, the Masonic Order will run into trouble with some organizations, secular and religious, that would like to confine themselves to one section of society or one religious outlook. This Masonry must constantly refuse to do so. It is universal in its outlook. 3. If Masonry is to pass on the best of our modern civilization, if it is to embrace all religions, races, and cultures, then it has to rid itself of some of the static and unproductive ideas and get into the stream of present-day life. The ideal of the 18th century was knowledge. The ideal of the 19th century was projection of morality into the new knowledge. The ideal of the 20th century is the development of communication so that knowledge, ideals, morality can be part of the universal culture. Wherever in this world there is a lodge of Masons, that lodge should be in the forefront of communicating by modern means the ideals of knowledge, morality, and universality. When the entered apprentice stands before the master of the lodge, some working tools are placed in his hands. He is told what they are. He is told what they are to be used for. He must use them and then return them to the master. They never become his own. The Grand Master of the universe has entrusted to the Masonic Order working tools by which the life of this suffering world may be molded. We do not own those working tools. They are just for us to use and then to return them to the eternal. When we return those tools, we pray that they may have been used in the craft of humanity so that the great lodge of this world will have pleasure and profit. For after all the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits, their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. All right, now is the time in the show that I ask you to support the show. Whence is listener supported, basically. So we depend on you, the listeners, to purchase the show apps, whether you're on Android, Apple, or a Windows phone. We have applications for you there that are used much the same way as just a Flash player or the iTunes podcast application. However, when you buy the app, you not only get all those features that are available to you those ways, but also you get access to the papers we read on the show and any other extras. What we like to do is at least give you the paper that we read on the show every week, as well as a Masonic wallpaper for the show, for your mobile device. So you can check that out. If you go to wcypodcast.com and click on support the show, you'll see that, as well as links to onit.com, where you can go there and buy some healthy living supplements, and you can use the promo code WCY, and that'll get you 10% off. They send a little bit of the purchase amount back to this show to help keep the lights on. And the same thing happens on FreemasonryArt.com, which is run by Brother Juan Sepulveda of the Winding Stairs podcast and also a co-host on the Masonic Roundtable. He's got some amazing art pieces. I urge you to go over there and check it out, FreemasonryArt.com. Use the coupon code WCY, and it'll get you a little percentage off, and he will support this show as well. And finally, we have PayPal, so you can do a direct donation to this show. Whether you donate $1 or $2, whatever you want to donate, it goes right back into this, and it pays for the hosting costs of this show, the development costs of anything else that we want to come up with, like the esoteric show, the history show, or the conspiracy show, all dealing with Masonry. So I thank you in advance for doing that. I just want to throw out a huge thanks to those of you who are repeat donors. I cannot thank you enough. Alright, before we go any further in this episode, I wanted to mention that we had a bit of a contest, and it was just me having some fun on the last episode before we went on a holiday break. I said that if you could, on Facebook, let me know the 4 clues I gave in the last episode and to what I was referring to, that I would send you a gift. So we actually had a couple winners, and I will be contacting them very soon to mail them something kind of silly. The contest actually had nothing to do with Masonry. In fact, the contest was whether you could pick up on the clues to Back to the Future. So within the show, we had a sound effect from Back to the Future. We had Night Train from Back to the Future, which was a song that was played in the movie. We also had, at the end of the show, our outro was the theme from Back to the Future, and at one point in the outro I said, I'll talk to you all in the future. So if you got all 4 of those right, and you were one of the first couple people who did it, there's 2 people actually who are going to get a little something from me. I'm going to be sending them off soon as I get their addresses and I inform them that they've won. So that's that. And I'm pleased to say that we are going to go with our first Esoteric Freemasonry Minute. Being the first segment of this kind, it does run longer than a minute. Brother Matthew Chojnacki is your host, and he does a great job, and I want to preface this by telling you that he's a very deeply spiritual and esoteric individual, and I think you're going to love where he takes you, and you're going to love the segment if you're into esoteric stuff. So I will go right into that segment right now.
Welcome to the Esoteric Freemasonry Minute with your host, Matthew Chojnacki. As this is the first episode, I want to give you a brief introduction to who I am and also provide you with a short lesson to think about until the next episode, where I really begin digging into the meat of the symbolism. I hail from Dundee Lodge number 190 in Carpentersville, Illinois. I'm young and have a huge beard and love visiting lodges and programs. So, if you're from Northern Illinois, we've probably met before, or you've probably seen me somewhere. I've had a bizarrely unique initiatic experience, but I prefer not to puff myself up, so I won't go into that. I'm a member of both the York and Scottish Rites, but refuse to join the shrine. I'm also a member of Amorc, Boda, and the Golden Dawn, and am still on a continual search for more light. I was raised as a fundamentalist Christian and grew up in the church, but the gnosis I have received on my journey has brought me into a deeper understanding that helped break me away from blind literalism and the bondage of demiurgic ideologies. I'm a licensed minister and seek nothing more than the reintegration of our beings with our divine pleromic estate from which we descended to take on flesh. I strongly believe that there is a secret doctrine of ascension in Masonic symbolism, and I hope to help bring some of the puzzle pieces to light through this show. Those who deny the existence of this doctrine have settled for the explanations that their physical eyes can read, instead of the intuitive insights that can be gleaned from contemplation and comprehension of Masonic symbolism. This secret doctrine can only be brought to view when we examine Masonic symbolism in its esoteric context, with the guidance of the allegorical and Kabbalistic interpretations of the Holy Bible, and an awareness of the teachings of the ancient mysteries. When these 3 are united, a certain science begins to emerge. Do not take my words as doctrine. I encourage you to seek out the truth for yourselves. Today, I'm going to present to you an abridged version of an article that I am working on, but have not yet chosen which magazine to publish it in. The article is titled 3 Commonly Overlooked Masonic Lessons, and I will now present you with 2 of them, and I hope that they can help you on your path. The first of these 3 overlooked lessons is that our search for light begins with closed eyes. During our degrees, we are blindfolded and led around by a guide. We cannot first enter the lodge as a Mason without having been blindfolded and our physical sight taken from us. It is only through this voluntary submission to material blindness that we are led to receive light. Now, many people think that the light spoken of in Masonry is merely symbolic or metaphoric, but I testify to you today that light is very real and tangible for the perceptive soul. I have had a greater knowledge, comprehension, and insight given to me through my initiations, and each one has marked a new phase in my life. This light, this knowledge, is an illumination of the mind. It is a Gnostic awareness that can only be experienced and not explained. We have all received it, yet not all have perceived it. This light of the Logos is only developed in the inner man and not in the outward flesh. The fact that in Masonry we are blindfolded to receive it should be a lesson to us that the search for the spiritual light needs to be done in physical darkness. Only when we close our eyes can we begin to see the true light. Not all of the light in Masonry can be conferred in a lodge of Master Masons. So if you seek more light, I encourage you to do what Masonry teaches you to, and get down on your knees, close your eyes, and pray to the Supreme Architect of the universe by whatever name you call him. Meditations and prayers are absolutely essential to spiritual growth and development, and without them, you will begin to rely on your intellect of flesh instead of your intuition of spirit. Without experience in extended meditations and prayers, you are actually unable to reach some of the higher impartations of light, and cannot receive some of the initiations in the non-physical realms. Astral projection is one of the marks of adepthood, and you cannot project without learning how to keep your eyes closed for longer periods of time. Closed-eye meditations also help you learn the enigmatic inner machinations of the mind, and they can show you the source of your passions and how to subdue them. Descending through the arches and finding that hidden inner word can only be done with the eyes closed. If you seek to fill yourself with light, and to show suitable proficiency in the development of your inner life, then I implore you to learn how to close your eyes for extended periods of time and find the light. The second overlooked lesson is the importance of returning to the same questions again and again and again. In the craft degrees, the initiate is led around the lodge and the same questions are asked and like answers returned as before. Through this, we learn that we need to keep asking the same questions, because a one-time answer isn't enough to satisfy our true master. It is extremely dangerous to find an answer and then settle with it. You need to keep digging and digging, keep questioning and questioning. Even when you think you know the answer, come back later with more light and ask again. Some of the deepest truths are the simplest overlooked ones. Do not become stagnant or you will rot, but instead keep flowing. If you don't return and ask again, you may settle for the profane explanations, such as that the true meaning of the square and compasses is a reminder to square our actions and circumscribe our desires. Yet, the square and compasses have many deeper levels of meaning that can only be unlocked through continual inquiry. One of these interpretations is that they represent the body and the spirit, and the ascension of the points of the compasses in the degrees refers to the domination of spirit over body. The Great Light teaches us to walk in the spirit, and this is one of the most important keys to unlocking the storehouse of esoteric masonry. Some may disagree and say that the compasses represent the soul instead of the spirit, but through meditation and contemplation, I have found that the location of the soul in this symbolism is found in the overlapping intersections between the square and compasses. One of the traits of men dominated more by the flesh than the spirit is the settling down on interpretations and thinking that we know all there is to know about a symbol or phrase. This prideful blindness is found most often in older Masons of many years who have grown too comfortable in what they think they know, or in the ritualists who know the words to say but not the meanings of those words, or in the young ego-inflated Masons who seek to teach before they finish learning the alphabet. This settling down for answers is something that we all have to deal with. But if we truly want to make ourselves better, we need to make sure we don't get too confident and comfortable. Those who exalt themselves and think they know it all about Masonic symbolism will be brought low, and those who humble themselves to learn and receive will be lifted up. You need to constantly question everything and return to the questions that you already have had answered. There is this horrible virus going around Masonry that makes many think that now we are enlightened and no longer have the need for a primitive Bible. This is far from true, and there is a reason why Master Masons are each given a Holy Bible, and why some of the degrees, such as the 5th degree in the York Rite, specifically teach us to go to the Bible for answers. This does not mean that we should take it too literally or legalistically, for there are blinds in that book for those who try to rely on their physical eyes to interpret it. But in that book there is the light of the Creator hidden within some of the darkness of human words. It is only by returning to the text with greater levels of light and comprehension that we can begin to penetrate into the deeper meanings of the text. Do not think that just because you grew up in Sunday school and had some Bible stories read to you by your grandma as a kid means that you understand the Bible and are too good for it now. return, and try to pull out deeper nuggets of wisdom. If you do not open this great light of Masonry regularly, you will stumble around in darkness. Keep questioning everything, even in the Bible, even some of the fundamentals of your faith that you thought you knew. Keep revisiting your Blue Book, even if you've read it a dozen times. Keep rereading some of the gem-filled books on Masonry, and you'll be surprised by what you find on your second or third or fourth read-through. Don't ever stop learning, for education helps discover some of the latent virtues of the mind, and we cannot learn a thing if we think that we already know all there is to know about a symbol or topic. However, don't always expect a different answer when you return and re-question, for sometimes the same answers are returned as before, but from a different angle or a deeper understanding. If you truly want a deep comprehension instead of a superficial definition, then you need to deflate yourself enough to be able to ask the same questions 2 or 3 or more times. So, those are 2 of the 3 lessons of the article, and if you want to find out what the third one is, you'll have to wait until I publish it. I'll let you all know when and where it gets published whenever I know myself. I hope that this encourages you to seek light with your eyes closed and to keep questioning things that you thought you already had the answer to. Before I go, I'd like to recommend some authors for you to read in order to begin investigating the secret doctrine within Masonry. Read George Steinmetz's books on the Lost Word and on the Royal Arch. Begin looking at Philotas, but he has some heavy stuff that requires a lot of insight and light to unpack, so save him when you're more advanced. Also, I know it seems obvious, but read Albert Pike's works. All of them. I understand people's frustration with Pike, and trust me, he frustrates me beyond belief too. I wish I could sit down and argue with him for hours, but his works are required to gain a deeper comprehension of Masonic symbolism and the ancient mystery schools. He was a genius, but was a bit too much of an empiricist sometimes. I hope you enjoyed this first segment of the Esoteric Freemasonry Minute. There is a simple, somewhat obvious code hidden in the title of this show, and I encourage you to try to find it, so that you can begin to train your brain to look for multiple layers of meaning in seemingly straightforward wordings. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions or invitations, please don't hesitate to email me at efm.matt@wcypodcast.com. Once again, that is efm.matt@wcypodcast.com. Or come visit me at my home lodge in Carpentersville. We are a unique group that is heading in a productive direction. I would like to leave you with an extremely important quote to munch on from the 4th degree of the Southern Jurisdiction Scottish Rite ritual that is unfortunately absent from the emasculated Northern Jurisdiction system. The Junior Warden informs us that a complete understanding of Freemasonry is impossible without some familiarity with the Kabbalah. I bless you all with the greater knowledge and comprehension of the greatest architect beyond this universe, and the light of the Logos and the wisdom of Sophia. Thanks for listening, and have a safe journey upwards back home.
Alright, now it's time for this week's famous Freemason. This week is Smith Dickens Atkins, born June 9th, 1836, passed away March 27th, 1913. He was an American newspaper editor, lawyer, and Union Army colonel during the American Civil War who temporarily commanded brigades of infantry for 2 periods of time and cavalry for 3 periods of time, and who was awarded the grades of Brevet Brigadier General of Volunteers and Brevet Major General of Volunteers. After hostilities ended, he returned to his editorial work and became an author. Atkins was born in Horseheads, New York in 1836, and he moved to Illinois in 1845 and later entered the Rock River Seminary in Mount Morris. He also became the editor of the town's Gazette and began practicing law. He was a supporter of the canvasser for Abraham Lincoln for President of the United States. He was elected prosecuting attorney in 1860. He was the first man to enlist as a volunteer private soldier in Stevenson County, Illinois, upon the outbreak of the Civil War. Upon President Lincoln's call for volunteers at the outbreak of the Civil War, Atkins immediately chose to defend the Union cause and entered the volunteer ranks of his home state. He served in the Western theater of the conflict, and he was appointed the captain of the 11th Illinois Infantry on April 30th, 1861. And he was promoted to major on March 21st, 1862. By April, he was an assistant adjutant general of the 4th Division in the Army of Tennessee, but resigned on April 17th to take a 2-month respite from duty for health reasons. Atkins re-entered the military service that fall when he was appointed the colonel of the 92nd Illinois Mounted Infantry on September 4th, 1862. By February 1863, he was given brigade command of the Army of Kentucky until June 8th. Next, he commanded a brigade in the Army of Cumberland's Reserve Corps until July 15th, when he was transferred to the department's Cavalry Corps. As the Civil War ended, Atkins was in charge of the forces occupying the college town of Chapel Hill, North Carolina. On April 17, 1865, Easter Sunday, Atkins paid a visit to the home of David Swain, the president of the University of North Carolina. Both men shared a love of history. While the two were talking, President Swain's daughter Ella brought them a history book. Atkins soon began courting Ella, and the couple were married on August 23, 1865. The marriage was controversial, and Ella's mother would not eat at the same table with Atkins. The couple resided in Freeport. Atkins and Ella had 6 children, 3 of whom survived to adulthood. Ella died of influenza at age 38 and was buried in a historic Oakwood Cemetery in Raleigh, North Carolina. The story is related in the book Undaunted Heart, The True Story of the Southern Belle and a Yankee General by Susie Burrill, published by Eno Publishers in 2009. Burrill is a great-great-granddaughter of Ella Swain and Smith Atkins. Once Atkins left the war, he became the editor of Freeport's daily Journal newspaper, and he was also the city's postmaster for 24 years. He published at least 2 books, Democracy and Dred Scott in 1860, and Abraham Lincoln in 1909. He also wrote With Sherman's Cavalry Marching Through Georgia, and he was the first president of the Freeport Public Library and a member of the Board of Education. He was also active in veterans organizations and affairs, and he passed away in Freeport 1913, and he's buried there in the city cemetery. That's it for this week. I really hope you guys have enjoyed the first episode of 2015. We are really looking forward to the year, and just want to thank you guys for listening. So please check us out on Facebook, find us on Twitter. You can find us on Google Plus at the email address wcypodcast@gmail.com, or you can just search Whence Came You. Remember, Far From Center with Robert P. Lewis is coming back. The Masonic Roundtable goes live every Tuesday night at 9 Central. The Masonic Radio Theater comes out with a monthly episode. The next one is going to be pretty funny, and that's it. So until next week, stay on the level. For Whence Came You, I'm Robert Johnson.